ask what exists, we enter the territory of ontology, the central part of metaphysics concerned with being as being. At first, this question seems almost absurd. How could anyone doubt what exists? The world presents itself so vividly that questioning its contents might sound like philosophical play. Yet the moment we look more closely, the question reveals itself as far from simple. Human beings constantly make judgments about what is real and what is not, often without recognizing that these judgments are shaped by deep metaphysical categories. When we say that a table is real, but a hallucination is not, or that numbers exist in some sense but fictional characters do not, or that societies are composed of individuals but have emergent properties of their own, we are making ontological claims. We are sorting the world into categories of being. We are declaring what counts as real and what does not. Ontology does not attempt to list everything that happens to exist in the universe. That would be an impossible task. Instead, it tries to identify the most general kinds of being. It aims to describe the categories that structure reality. If we see the world as a vast landscape full of objects, organisms, events, and relationships, ontology seeks to understand the underlying architecture of that landscape. Are the basic elements objects or processes, substances or structures, particles or fields, concrete things or abstract forms? Do mental states belong to the basic furniture of reality, or do they supervene on something else? Are moral values real in the same way that physical objects are real? These questions are ontological, and the answers we give shape our worldview. Most people do not think about ontology explicitly, but they use ontological categories constantly. When we distinguish between physical illnesses and psychological ones, or between natural objects and artificial constructs, or between facts and values, we are drawing ontological boundaries. These boundaries influence how we interpret events, how we relate to others, what we think counts as evidence, and how we explain the world around us. Without noticing, we sort existence into different bins. Ontology steps in to ask why we sort things the way we do, and whether a different sorting might make more sense. Although ontology may seem abstract, it has profound importance for many areas of thought. Science depends on ontological commitments. It seeks to discover the kinds of things that exist in the physical world, such as particles, fields, forces, organisms, or ecosystems. Psychology and neuroscience presuppose a certain ontology of mind, even if they rarely articulate it. Ethics depends on whether values are thought to exist objectively or merely as human constructions. Even politics has ontological foundations, since it presupposes certain beliefs about the nature of persons, communities, rights, and institutions. Consider a simple example. Suppose someone says that a legal corporation exists. What does this mean? A corporation is not a physical object like a chair. It is not a collection of atoms. Nor is it a mere fiction, for it can sign contracts, own property, and take legal responsibility. A corporation is a social entity, a kind of object that exists because people recognize it and act according to certain rules. Its existence depends on collective practices and shared understandings. This shows that ontology is not merely about physical objects. It concerns any kind of entity that plays a role in our explanatory frameworks. Another example concerns mathematics. Do numbers exist? If they do, what kind of things are they? They do not seem to be located in space and time. You cannot bump into the number 7 on the street. Yet mathematics describes the world with extraordinary precision. Many philosophers have argued that mathematical entities exist in an abstract realm. Others claim that numbers are mental constructs or linguistic tools. These disagreements are ontological and they influence how we understand science. Ontology, thus, invites us to take seriously the question of what it means to exist. It asks whether existence comes in different modes and whether some modes are more fundamental than others. It examines the hierarchy of being, the relation between parts and wholes, the nature of categories, and the structure of explanation. These questions may sound abstract, but they lie behind the most ordinary experiences. Once we begin to reflect on the nature of existence, the question naturally arises whether there are different types or categories of being. A tree, a number, a friendship, and a law all seems to exist, yet they exist in different ways. Trying to force everything into a single category can lead to confusion. For this reason, philosophers have long attempted to describe the categories of being. Aristotle gave one of the earliest and most influential accounts. He listed 10 categories, including substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, action, passion, posture, and possession. For Aristotle, substances were the primary beings, the things that exist in their own right, whereas the other categories describe the ways in which substances can be. Although Aristotle's list is no longer accepted as definitive, the basic idea remains important. Different kinds of things exist in different ways. A material object exists differently from a mathematical object. An event is different from a substance. A property is different from a relation. Once we recognize these distinctions, we begin to see that ontology requires a careful mapping of the world's structure. Consider the distinction between objects and events. An object, such as a chair or a planet, appears to be something that persists through time. An event, such as a lightning strike or a conversation, appears to be something that happens. Objects occupy space for extended periods, whereas events unfold in time. If we ask whether objects are more fundamental than events, or whether the world is ultimately made of processes rather than things, we are engaged in ontology. Another important distinction is between the concrete and the abstract. Concrete entities exist in space and time. They can be touched, measured, or observed. Abstract entities, such as numbers, sets, propositions, or geometric forms, do not appear to exist in any particular location. Yet, many abstract entities are indispensable for thought. The distinction between concrete and abstract is one of the most central in ontology, and philosophers continue to debate whether abstract objects exist independently or whether they depend on minds or languages. One of the oldest and most persistent ontological questions concerns the nature of substances. A substance is typically understood as something that exists in its own right, something that can bear properties without depending on other things. For instance, a particular oak tree is a substance. It has properties such as height, shape, or color, but it does not depend on these properties for its existence in the way they depend on it. The tree could survive a change in color or shape, but the color or shape cannot exist without some substance to which it belongs. The idea of substance has played a central role in metaphysics since Aristotle. For him, substances were the primary beings because they carry the properties and undergo the changes. Later philosophers developed this idea in various ways. Descartes argued that there are two kinds of substances, mind and body, each with its own essential properties. Spinoza thought that there is only one substance, which he called God or nature, and that everything else is a mode of this substance. Many modern philosophers have moved away from substance metaphysics, arguing that the world may instead be composed of processes, structures, or events. Still, the concept of substance remains alive because it captures something intuitive about how we experience the world. We treat objects as enduring bearers of change. The oak tree loses its leaves in autumn and regains them in spring, yet we consider it the same tree. The idea of a substance helps explain how something can undergo change without losing its identity. It also provides a way to distinguish between essential and accidental properties. An essential property is one that a substance cannot lose without ceasing to be what it is. An accidental property is one that can be lost or gained without altering the substance's identity. Yet the notion of substance is also controversial. Some philosophers have argued that substances are nothing more than bundles of properties. According to this view, the tree is simply a collection of qualities that hang together in a regular pattern. There is no underlying substance beneath the properties. Others have proposed that the world may be more like a network of events or processes rather than a collection of enduring things. These debates illustrate how ontology invites us to reconsider our most basic assumptions. To make sense of the structure of being, philosophers have long distinguished between objects, properties, and relations. Objects are the things that exist. Properties are the qualities objects possess. Relations are the connections that hold between objects. This triad helps us organize our ontological map, even if we later question whether objects or properties or relations are more fundamental. For example, consider a red apple. The apple is the object. The redness, roundness, and sweetness are properties. The fact that the apple is on the table is a relation between the apple and the table. These distinctions seem obvious, yet they open the door to deeper questions like, what is a property? Is it something that exists independently of the object, or is it merely a way of describing the object? Does redness exist in its own right, or only as a feature of objects? If two different apples share the same shade of red, what makes it the same property in both cases? This is the problem of universals, one of the oldest questions in ontology. Some philosophers have argued that universals exist independently and are instantiated by particular objects. According to this view, there is a universal redness, and this universal is present in every red object. Other philosophers deny the existence of universals. They argue that properties are particular to each object and that similarity between objects is simply a matter of resemblance. A third group, known as the trope theorists, claims that each instance of a property is a particular trope, and that similarity is based on the resemblance between tropes. These debates show that even something as simple as color opens up complex ontological questions. Relations raise similar problems. Is a relation something that exists independently of the objects it relates? For example, does the relation of being taller than exist as its own entity? Or is it simply a verbal description of two objects? If all properties were intrinsic, we could describe each object independently. But many properties are relational. A person's age is defined relative to time. A mountain's height depends on sea level. A planet's orbit depends on gravitational interactions. Ontology must therefore account for relational structures, not just isolated substances. In recent philosophy, many thinkers have argued that the world is better understood as a network of events or processes rather than as a collection of enduring objects. According to this view, what exists fundamentally are occurrences, activities, interactions, or flows. Objects, on this account, are stable pattern within these processes. A wave is not a thing floating on top of water, but a pattern created by the movement of water molecules. A cloud is not an object in the same sense as a stone, but a temporary configuration of water vapor. Even solid objects like mountains or trees can be seen as processes unfolding over time. This process ontology has gained support in fields such as physics and biology. In physics, particles are often described not as tiny billiard balls, but as excitations of fields. These excitations behave more like events than like substances. In biology, organisms are seen as complex processes that maintain themselves through metabolism, growth, and reproduction. The identity of an organism lies in its organized activity rather than in any particular material component. These perspectives challenge the traditional substance ontology and invite us to consider whether the world is fundamentally dynamic rather than static. Another development is the rise of structural realism, the view that what is most fundamental in the world is not objects or substances, but structures and relations. According to structural realists, science tells us more about the relations between entities than about the intrinsic nature of the entities themselves. For example, physics describes the behavior of particles in terms of equations and symmetries, which are structural features. Some philosophers argue that the entities described by physics may not have intrinsic natures at all. What matters is their place in a relational structure. These developments illustrate how ontology evolves in response to scientific discoveries. They also show that the categories of being are not fixed once and for all. They are philosophical tools that help us understand the world, and they may need revision. A crucial distinction in ontology is between concrete and abstract objects. Concrete objects exist in space and time. They can be observed and measured. Abstract objects do not exist in space or time, yet they seem indispensable. Mathematical entities, such as numbers, sets, and functions, are abstract. Propositions, which are the meanings of statements, are abstract. Moral values, if they exist, may also be abstract. The existence of abstract objects is one of the most debated issues in metaphysics. Some philosophers, known as Platonists, claim that abstract objects exist independently of the physical world. According to this view, mathematical truths are discovered rather than invented. The number 2 exists whether or not anyone thinks about it. Other philosophers, known as nominalists, deny the existence of abstract objects. They argue that mathematics and language can be explained without positioning an independent realm of abstract entities. A third group, known as conceptualists, claims that abstract objects exist only in the mind. They are mental constructs rather than independent realities. These debates are not merely academic. They influence how we understand truth, meaning, mathematics, logic, and science. If abstract objects exist independently, then the structure of reality includes a non-physical realm. If they do not, then we need an alternative account of how mathematics can describe the world so accurately. The question of abstract objects is therefore central to ontology. Another important distinction in ontology is between natural kinds and social or human kinds. Natural kinds are categories that exist independently of human classification. For example, chemical elements such as hydrogen or gold are natural kinds. Their properties do not depend on human conventions. Biological species are often considered natural kinds, although this is debated. Natural kinds are believed to reflect real divisions of the world. Human or social kinds, by contrast, exist because of human practices, conventions, languages, and institutions. Categories such as marriage, citizenship, money, or university are social kinds. They depend on collective recognition. If everyone stopped treating a piece of paper as money, it would cease to be money. Social kinds therefore have a different ontological status from natural kinds. They exist, but their existence is mind-dependent. Understanding the difference between natural and social kinds is important because it influences how we think about identity, responsibility, rights, and social structures. For example, whether a particular social category is seen as natural or constructed affects how we treat it. Ontology therefore has ethical and political implications. As we think about the different kinds of beings that exist, another ontological question arises. Does reality have levels or layers? Many philosophers and scientists think of the world as stratified. At the most basic level, we find fundamental particles or fields. At higher levels, we find atoms, molecules, cells, organs, and organisms. Above that, we encounter psychological states, cultural practices, and social institutions. Each level depends on the one beneath it, yet each level also has its own patterns, laws, and explanatory principles. For example, a living cell depends on chemical processes, but biology cannot be reduced entirely to chemistry. The organization of the cell introduces new regularities and behaviors. Similarly, the mind depends on the brain, but mental states may possess properties that are not easily described in terms of neural activity. Social institutions depend on people, but they have their own norms, rules, and powers. These examples suggest that reality may involve multiple levels, each with its own ontology. This layered view of reality raises important questions. Are some levels more fundamental than others? Do higher level properties reduce to lower level ones? Or do they emerge? Emergence is the idea that new kinds of properties or behaviors arise at higher levels that cannot be predicted from lower level components alone. Emergence suggests a rich and complex ontology in which different kinds of beings coexist and interact. Whenever we adopt a scientific or philosophical theory, we commit ourselves to the existence of certain kinds of entities. For example, if we accept the theory of evolution, we commit to the existence of species, genes, and natural selection. If we accept quantum mechanics, we commit to the existence of wave functions or quantum fields. If we accept a psychological theory, we commit to the existence of beliefs, desires, or cognitive structures. These commitments are not always explicit, but they shape how we think. The philosopher Quine famously argued that the best guide to what exists is the ontology of our best scientific theories. According to this view, if our most successful theories refer to electrons, then we should accept that electrons exist. If our theories refer to space-time curvature, then space-time exists. On this view, ontology is closely tied to science. Other philosophers argue that science alone cannot settle ontology. They claim that different theories may describe the same phenomena using different ontological frameworks. For example, classical mechanics can be formulated in terms of forces acting at a distance or in terms of fields. Both frameworks work, but they carry different ontological assumptions. Ontology, therefore, may require philosophical analysis beyond what science provides. Ontology seeks to provide a coherent account of what exists, but this does not mean it aims for a single final list of entities. Rather, it aims to clarify the categories of being, the relations between those categories, the hierarchies of levels of reality, and the assumptions that allow us to make sense of the world. Ontology is like the grammar of reality. Just as grammar structures language, ontology structures our understanding of existence. Doing ontology requires patience, precision, and imagination. It requires us to examine familiar things with unfamiliar questions. It asks us to consider whether the distinctions we take for granted are justified, or whether alternative frameworks might capture reality more accurately. It invites us to reflect on the foundations of science, the nature of explanation, the status of abstract entities, and the relation between mind and world. Ontology also requires humility. Throughout history, many ontological systems have been proposed, and each has captured some aspect of reality while missing others. The diversity of ontologies shows that reality is rich and complex. It suggests that no single framework may capture everything. Still, the task is worthwhile, for it deepens our understanding of ourselves and the world. As we continue these metaphysics lectures, ontology will remain a constant companion. Each topic we explore will involve ontological questions. When we study identity and persistence, we will ask what it means for something to remain the same through change. When we study space and time, we will consider whether these are things in the world or forms of our understanding. When we study causation, we will ask what kinds of connections exist between events. When we study modality, we will ask what possibilities and necessities exist. When we study consciousness, we will ask whether mental states are distinct from physical ones. When we study social reality, we will ask how collective practices give rise to new kinds of beings. Ontology provides the conceptual foundation for all these inquiries. It gives us the categories, distinctions, and frameworks we need to think clearly. It helps us articulate the assumptions we rely on and evaluate whether they are justified. By engaging in ontology, we become more reflective, more aware of our worldview, and more capable of examining it critically. The aim of this lecture has been to open the door to ontology, to show that the question of what exists is not trivial but central to metaphysics. In the lectures ahead, we will move through a detailed examination of the structures, relations, and principles that shape reality. We will see how ontology influences every aspect of our thinking, and we will continue the journey that began with the pre-Socratics, who asked the first bold questions about being and who remind us that philosophy begins with the courage to wonder.